Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today we have a presentation for the recent arrest on Gray Street. It's going to be a PowerPoint presentation with a mix of video and photographs. Chief Buckner is going to take us through the presentation, and you will hear from a few other speakers. At the conclusion, there will be time for questions. The presentation today includes video of the arrest. I want to provide an important notice to the media and to those watching on social media. Some of the portions of the video include strong language. If this is a live feed, please be advised that there are profanities in this video. Thank you. Chief.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's get right into it. The purpose of this incident briefing is to provide community with information regarding the arrest of Mr. Shallon Moore, which occurred on May 31st, 2019 on Gray Street in the city of Syracuse. During the stop and arrest, officers used force against Mr. Moore, which resulted in passionate views from many people in our community regarding this incident and police use of force in general. I understand the concerns the community has expressed as a result of this incident. Use of force is necessary by police during the course of their work, but it can be very difficult to watch. It rarely looks clean or good and takes place under intense circumstances. It involves physical contact and risk of injury to both the individual involved and the officer. I also understand that the use of force in this particular incident is, I just went there, difficult to watch and hard to understand. It has raised many legitimate questions from our community and even our own leaders. How does a sound ordinance violation lead to a man being pulled out of a car and forced to the ground? Why did the officer appear so angry, as Council President Hudson asked? The incident created an opportunity for a frank discussion about the use of force, why it is used, why is it okay to use, and how much force is appropriate before it infringes upon the community's sacred civil rights. Today is merely the start of the conversation. I will explain how we reviewed this particular incident, what conclusions we drew, what we learned, and what actions we will take in the short and long term. I will try to answer all questions that have been circulating for the past 2 weeks. As mentioned in previous press releases, we will offer future community forums for an even more in-depth discussion on this topic. First, let's talk about how we review use of force generally and what did happen in this case. Each and every time an officer uses force on the job, there's an automatic protocol that must be followed. The officer must immediately notify a supervisor, provide medical treatment where appropriate, document their actions, and their supervisor must complete a use of force report. The department reviews every single use of force, not just those that hit the media. If the review concludes that the force was not within departmental policy and training guidelines, there are consequences for the officers involved. For those who question, why 2 weeks? I can assure you that we were analyzing every single angle of the situation from a place of objectivity. Our Office of Professional Standards also conducted interviews with the parties involved. Our goal is to be thorough and timely. When we review the use of force cases where video evidence is available, we break it down to the most granular level to see what conditions and actions the officers were reacting to in each moment. We take it frame by frame. We are looking at the action and then also the reaction. Force can never be used as punishment or to send a message. Force can only be used to achieve a legitimate law enforcement purpose. So when we analyze the force, we ask, what was the individual doing or about to do that caused the officer to react the way he or she did? Like I said, it's an action and a reaction. Gaining compliance from an individual who refuses to cooperate with a lawful order and who will resist arrest is the most common scenario that causes us to use force. Timeline. First, some context. Officer Buskey and Brown were assigned to the patrol in a designated area of the city to proactively address issues of gun violence that have plagued our community. On the evening of May the 31st, they were involved in a coordinated effort to apprehend a person openly dealing drugs in Skinny Park next to the playground. They apprehended the individual and recovered an illegal handgun and drugs. There were also several gang members in and around the area surrounding the park. They were walking back to their car to leave the park and heard the extremely loud music emanating from a white Cadillac SUV over a block away. The SUV was traveling on Tioga Street and ultimately turned onto Oswego Street, where the officers were parked. At that point, Officer Buskey and Brown initiated a lawful traffic stop of that vehicle for violating the Syracuse Noise Control Ordinance, which is frequently reported a quality of life issue by our city residents. The stop occurred in the 100 block of Gray Street, and we will go to our second slide here. Here is a copy of the noise ordinance. One of the key terms that you will see here, that it creates unnecessary noise more than 50 feet from the vehicle. This was certainly observed by our officers, which was the reason for the traffic stop. And to give you some context as to the level of importance, at least from concern from our citizens, in 2018 we received 3,694 complaints of noise in our community. Year to date for 2019 we have 1,591 complaints for that. Slide 3, please. Here is a copy of the speakers that were in the video to give you kind of a visual as to what that looked like and how that might be possible to cause a violation of the noise ordinance. The following information is a brief overview of what transpired. The vehicle occupants were subsequently identified as Shalon Moore, the driver, and Yamil Osario, the front seat passenger. Officer Buskey approached the driver's side of the vehicle, while Officer Brown approached the passenger side. Mr. Moore produced his driver's license. Thereafter, Officer Buskey asked Mr. Moore to step out of the vehicle. He opened Mr. Moore's door and explained his reasons for the traffic stop and for his request for Mr. Moore to step out of the vehicle. Slide 4, please. Slide 4, and in each of the slides going forward that we will give you, I will give you somewhat of a primer for what you are about to see to help you to be able to focus on the information that we're providing that helps shape our decision. In this slide, this is the actual stop of the incident. The video seen online, there's about a 20-second difference from what you've seen from Mr. Osario's video in comparison to what was captured on our own body camera. There's an additional 20 seconds that you will be able to see with that. The officer's body camera had no sound at the beginning of this, which is common, but once it's activated and recording, the recording actually goes back 30 seconds to capture that information that was what was going on 30 seconds before we have that information. The officer gives an explanation to the driver of the stop, asking him to step out of the vehicle, an explanation of the law and why he is under arrest. There's a red arrow that you're going to see at the end of this video. That is the point to which, during this stop, when Mr. Osario begins to record his video that was seen on social media. Play the video, please. You can see the arrow there where Mr. Osario begins to record. Mr. Moore refused Officer Buskey's lawful request, asserted that he did not have to exit the vehicle, and requested that Officer Buskey issue him a ticket for loud music instead. Officer Buskey explained to Mr. Moore that the violation of the city ordinance is a form of arrest, and he again instructed him to exit the vehicle, reiterating the reasons for the request. Simultaneously, Officer Brown advised Mr. Moore that Officer Buskey was correct in his message and that he too attempted to convince Mr. Moore to exit the vehicle. Mr. Moore continued to refuse Officer Buskey's lawful directions, and as a response to his refusals, Officer Buskey forcefully removed Mr. Moore from the vehicle. It's important to note here that police officers are authorized by state statutory and case law to approach a vehicle that has been lawfully stopped based on a violation of local noise ordinance, and they are permitted to make a custodial arrest for a violation of local ordinance committed in their presence. Additionally, police officers are authorized by the same authority to search a person incident to lawful arrest for a violation of the city ordinance, even where, at the time of the announced arrest, an officer has already decided to issue an appearance ticket. Next video is slide number 5. At the start of the video, you will see Mr. Osario's video that you've seen online. And it also shows the initial point of our physical contact with both the arm and the back of the neck for Mr. Moore, and also several verbal refusals on the part of Mr. Moore. This is also the case to where the first violation of our demeanor policy was committed by one of the officers during the incident. Show the video, please. When you see the hand positioning here, there were 2 points of contact with the wrist and then one to the back of the head. The fact that we have verbal noncompliance, physically not doing what we've asked the gentleman to do, we took the position that we were physically going to go on hand and physically force him to be removed from that vehicle. Those 2 point of contacts have one thing as a goal: control. And at that point that we feel like that there's a potential for this situation to escalate up, we took those positions to forcefully remove him from the vehicle, and you will later see some of the response from Mr. Moore and then our response to that as a result of that. In the slide 6 video, you will see that Mr. Moore grabs the steering wheel as we're attempting to take him out of the vehicle and what we believe to be bracing himself to continue to resist our forceful removal of the car. In slide 7, you will see more clearly from a different angle the actually grabbing of the steering wheel during this incident. On slide 8, you will see a slow motion video. The slow motion video of Mr. Moore going back into the driver's seat. And he looks back at Mr. Osario and he tells him to begin recording this. I guess it's unknown to him that Mr. Osario is already recording, but is also at the time when we lose our initial contact with Mr. Moore as he's physically attempting to turn back around, and then we position our hands with him that you will see later on. Slide 9, you will see another slow motion view from a different angle of Mr. Moore getting back towards the driver's seat, and also the point to where I show you that the officer loses his grip and has to readjust. And the purpose of us showing you different angles of what's going on also has a dual purpose. While it's frustrating for us to wait for due process to take place, it's critically important that we try to gather as much information as we possibly can to dissect what has occurred so that we can make sure that we're making objective decisions about this information. It's also important that going forward, when you look at the fact that we are a newly implemented body-worn camera police agency, when you see the initial video from a citizen or the initial video even from an officer, please let's not jump to conclusions until we have all of the information, until a complete and thorough investigation has been conducted to allow our community to get a decision based upon a comprehensive review of that. And I will tell you that I certainly thank our city and our media folks for doing that, and I thought it was important to say that at this time because you all did allow us to do due process, and we greatly appreciate that. The video for slide 9. Slide 10 and 11. you will see a still frame. Officer Buskey states in his report that Mr. Moore reaches towards his waistband area. What's significant about the waistband area is the most common area that if an individual is armed, more than likely it's going to be in that area. And while it was later proved that Mr. Moore was actually removing a phone from his lap, from the view of the officer, you can understand why we would view this as a threat. And also key to point out that despite having a disagreement, despite with thinking that you're right in what you're doing as a citizen, it's critically important that you comply with the officer's instruction and what he or she is asking you to do. It's critically important that you not reach about the vehicle, that you not put your hands in areas that the officer would have any reason to believe that you're doing anything sinister that would make us escalate up to something that would all be significantly more grave than what we've seen in this incident. So reaching around in any vehicle in a police encounter for anyone, we suggest to our public, please don't do those kinds of things. Take the appropriate avenues that we have for you to address those complaints at a later time and date. On the scene is not the time to do that. 10 and 11, please. Okay. 12, you will see a video of us pulling him out of the car. And there was also, if you've seen the video, which I'm sure that you all have, there were a couple of strikes that was given to Mr. Moore when he was on the ground. You'll see the first of those strikes. You'll also see a term that we call table topping, to where when Mr. Moore goes to the ground, he does not completely prone out. He's resting on his arms and elbows there, kind of propping himself up on the ground. Some would articulate that he is bracing himself from the fall, that he is protecting himself during this encounter. Obviously, we certainly understand that you can have that context or looking at it through that lens, but this is a clear continuation of resisting arrest during this incident.
Why he doing all that? He not resisting or nothing. Why he doing?
And here you can see where his arms are propped up and he's bracing himself of the table topping. In slide 13, you will see another slow motion video. You will see attempts for us to gain control of his hands. The purpose of that is to place him in cuffs, and you will see one of the low velocity closed fist strikes to the gentleman's face. The reason that I emphasize low velocity is that when you look at this at real time, yes, he was struck a couple of times to the head and face. But if you look at the velocity of those punches, it was clearly no intent on the part of our officers to harm Mr. Moore. It was used as a distraction technique because the natural instinct that once you are struck is for you to attempt to protect that area. And you will see in the video that once we begin to strike him for the 2 times, and in between both instances, we went immediately to his hands once he exposed them to attempt to get him to comply with what we're asking him to do. And at no time was there anyone on top of Mr. Moore with some sort of pummeling or hitting him multiple times with no justification. That was not the case here. Slide 14, another slow motion video. Buskey notices for the first time that the passenger in the vehicle has exposed himself. This becomes a distraction to Officer Buskey because at the time that we're physically dealing with Mr. Moore on the ground, Mr. Buskey notices that Mr. Osario has either put his phone out of that passenger side. I don't know what he's doing because we can't see it from the footage, but he does enough for Mr. Buskey to be distracted by Osario's movement in the vehicle. Point of emphasis again, if you're a passenger in a vehicle and this is going on, I think it's reasonable to expect that anyone would want to see what's going on with my friend. Is he in danger? Is his safety being exposed here? I get that. I will tell you and respectfully ask our public, if you're a passenger in a vehicle where this kind of thing is going on, stay in the vehicle, keep your hands exposed to where the officer can see them, and please do not do anything that would lead the police to believe that you are a part of the problem that we're dealing with here on the ground or that you pose a threat in the vehicle that we've yet to secure and then we've yet to determine what's in that vehicle. Please do not do those kinds of things. This is when you see Officer Buskey look up. Slide 15 and 16. You see the second low velocity closed fist strike. Officers trying to pull the arms back again. Officer Buskey instructs Officer Bach, who's now on the scene, to go and deal with Mr. Osorio, who's the passenger in the vehicle. Here's a video, Officer Brown's body camera. One illustrating officers giving verbal commands and trying to force the arms behind the back. Officers' legs can be seen on the head of Mr. Moore in an effort to control the head. Where the head goes, the body goes. Legs come off of the head as soon as Mr. Moore is placed in the cuffs. A knee or hands on the heads of anyone is unsightly. It's very easy to look at that and say, well, why were we doing that? It looks extreme. We continue to have noncompliance. We continue to have physical resisting of arrest. We're attempting to get him in the cuffs. Raising his head up is an indication to us that he is not willing to do what we've asked him to do yet. And again, we continue to begin to escalate up because we're now in a couple of minutes of dealing with him. So we're not going to continue to keep doing the kinds of things that we've done that have not given us the success that we're looking for. You also see that the resting the leg is a method of control, not a strike, where we think Mr. Moore also received his first injuries. When you see at the end of our presentation what Mr. Moore physically looked like at the end of this video, and I'll prime you for that now, as a community, as our media outlets, think of everything that disturbs you in this video. Think of everything that you question about this incident. And then I want you to physically look at the individual who sustained this incident, was the subject of our energy, and what does he look like at the end of this incident? I ask you to question what you question by looking at him as a part of your evaluation. That was also, I failed to mention, that one of the second instances of a violation of our demeanor policy that was documented during the investigation. Slide 18 shows Officer Bach temporarily taking Mr. Osorio into custody. He appears to be covering his camera, which we will talk about that later. That was a part of much contention from our community, that we felt like that the officer was trying to turn his camera off during that incident, and physically looking at it, I understand why that question was raised. But we also learned that the officer was actually turning his camera on during that incident, and that will be explained by Detective Rustin here later.
Look, they bugging for nothing. Look, I ain't resisting or nothing.
Slide 19 will be a video showing the full Officer Bach interaction with Mr. Osorio, the passenger in the vehicle. We'd like to thank the CRB for providing the full video that we had of Mr. Osorio's phone there. Officer Bach is seen securing the passenger with no force. The original video posted online was 31 seconds, when in fact it was actually 4 minutes long. The phone was not damaged as originally claimed. We have video proof from some of our own body cameras to be able to show that the phone was used there on the scene shortly after this incident, when Mr. Osorio's phone was returned to him. And I want to do, again, a point of clarity here. You see what happened with Mr. Moore: resistance, noncompliance, force. You see Mr. Osorio's taken from the vehicle: instructions, compliance, no issues. We cannot ignore that. Despite what you may feel about this entire incident, good, bad, or indifferent, we cannot ignore the different levels in response from our police officers in response to the action that they were receiving in that car. And there are two total polar opposites of what occurred, and that's because of the behavior of the occupant in that vehicle. I will now invite up Detective Russian, who will discuss the issues that were raised as it relates to the officer allegedly turning off their body camera.
Good morning. Questions were raised about the officer's interaction with the passenger of the vehicle, Mr. Osorio. Specifically, the moment in the video where it seems as though the officer is covering up the lens of his camera. This question was asked and looked into by the department. The department was able to conclude that the officer was not, in fact, turning off his camera at the time of the incident. Little context here. The officer prior to this incident was at the Skiddy Park, as the chief had mentioned, in an arrest that had occurred. During that incident, the officer actually turned off his camera all the way, had powered it down because he was coming to the public safety building to actually turn in some evidence and to complete some necessary paperwork. When we reviewed the audit trail system, which is a feature of the body-worn camera system, when we reviewed the audit trail system, we were able to determine that at 8:10 p.m., when the officer was leaving the Skiddy Park area, he actually powered the camera all the way down. At 8:21, when he observed the traffic stop, he turned the power on to his camera, and this was at the time of the actual traffic stop. And this is a feature of the body-worn camera system, and it provides us with this audit trail. At 8:21, again, the power of the camera was actually coming on, and you can see in the video as you watch that the power button on the body-worn camera is actually on the top. To actually activate the camera, you have to depress the camera twice. That actually starts the recording system. But there is a two-step process to activating the camera. Additionally, one of the things that has come up before, and we've discussed this in previous body-worn camera policy-related topics, is that the frontline officers, don't have the ability to edit, alter, or delete the recordings. Once the recording is on the body-worn camera, it's secure. It cannot be changed, altered, or deleted by the officer. Once it's transmitted up to the cloud-based storage system, it also cannot be edited, altered, or deleted by the officer. And this is all recorded again within the audit system. At 8:23, this is where you can actually see that the officer had depressed the activation to actually start the recording system. The officer believed that he had activated his camera appropriately, but didn't realize that until 2 minutes later, and that's when he immediately activated the button. As the chief had mentioned, the body-worn camera program is new for the city of Syracuse, and we're constantly evaluating the body-worn camera policy, which gives the officers guidance with respect to how to use the body-worn camera. One of the things that we learned after reviewing this incident is that better guidance needs to be provided to the officers. And that's something that we're evaluating in terms of what state should the camera be on at all times, even in those times when you would probably be responding back to the building. That will be, all the information will be available, and we'll be thinking about that and making the appropriate changes with the body-worn camera policy. Thank you.
We're almost done. I appreciate your patience. So now is the time that we will go to the slides in reference to the pictures, as I primed you earlier, to think of the worst moment that you had in your head about the video, the action on the part of the officers to which you took the most exception to. Then I want you to physically look at what Mr. Moore looked like at the time that we booked him before he was processed into the jail. This is a picture where you see the scar, the scratch on Mr. Moore's face that we believe that he sustained when his head was pressed against the pavement during the encounter, during the physical arrest. A couple of other housekeeping issues. There were another question that I've received from common counselors in our community is why weren't the officers placed on administrative leave pending this investigation. There are automatic kind of qualifies for administrative leave in our policy. And the two qualifiers are where there is criminal activity or criminal charges against the officer. And then the second is when the officer involved in the use of deadly force. In my examination of this, obviously we didn't have criminal charges pending against the officer. There was no use of deadly force on that scene. So I made the discretionary decision to keep the officers in service. At no time did I feel like that the officers were a threat to the community or a threat to themselves. So that's why that decision was made. In conclusion, all this leads us to the question everyone wants to know: did the officers violate the policy or law, and will they be held accountable? As I said at the start, force never looks good. Images and language can often be disturbing when a police officer uses force. As part of our internal review, I have reviewed this incident through three lenses: the law, SPD policy, and our training. In summary, I have determined that the language and initial manner of interacting with Mr. Moore was not consistent with the policy or my expectations of how officers should interact with the public in a professional way, and for that, the two officers have been disciplined. However, it is my determination that the officer's use of force in this incident was appropriate and within departmental policies and our training. Once Mr. Moore repeatedly refused a lawful order to exit the vehicle, the officers acted within their training and within policy and the law to take steps to quickly and safely get him into handcuffs. The struggle continued only as long as Mr. Moore refused to give up his hands for handcuffs. The way in which officers interact with individuals in our community, not only traffic stops but in other encounters, will be a point of emphasis in our training moving forward. We've already received requests for internal affairs file. We cannot release that because of the law that we shared with you, being the New York Civil Rights Law 50A. 50A specifically mandates that we maintain the confidentiality of any part of the officer's personnel file that relates to discipline. As I said in my opening, this is just the start of the conversation. We will be reaching out to key stakeholders in the community and conducting community forums to discuss our new use of force policy. We will try to foster trust and understanding moving forward. I would now like to bring the mayor up for a few remarks.
Morning. I want to thank Chief Buckner and his team for their thorough review of this matter. What Chief Buckner has described this morning will certainly not satisfy all, but it is my hope it is viewed as progress in our effort to build stronger ties between the department and our community. In this difficult situation, our guiding principle has been to do the right thing, both in conducting the review and, equally important, in how we proceed going forward. I accept the findings of the investigation and will now focus my attention on making things better for our community and our police officers. I call on all of us, Chief Buckner and his team, our officers and their union leadership, the community and advocacy groups, and me, to use what we have experienced over the past 3 weeks to guide our decisions and actions moving forward, to forge stronger and healthier bonds between our police department and the people of our community. We have much to build on. We have the brave and dedicated police officers who risk their lives each and every day to keep us safe. We expect them to do extraordinary things that most of us could never accomplish. They have great authority and even greater responsibility. I have high expectations of professionalism at all times, and I will tolerate nothing less. We have the original citizen video of the arrest, which shed light on a topic we must address: police use of force. By the time the video made it onto social media, the arrest was already reported, as all use of force incidents are, and was being dealt with inside the department, which is good. The fact that the video was made public for all to view, also good. We have body-worn camera footage up close and from multiple angles, as you saw, which helped to document what occurred so we can learn from it. We have members of our community demanding different approaches, and they've done so in ways that have been genuine and productive, despite feelings of anger and fear. And we have a commitment in city government and in the leadership of the police department to being more open, to engaging in conversation, and to admitting when we're wrong and being willing to make change. The way in which this matter has been handled is evidence of this commitment.
We have much more to do to ultimately create a climate of trust and mutual support for our officers and for our community. It will be painful at times, but the relationship between police and community is strained, and it must be healed. Before the end of the month, we will take another step toward that when we conduct a public forum on June 28th on use of force. Chief Buckner, Deputy Mayor Owens, and I will be there. I urge all who care about this issue to join in. It will be the first of many conversations, and I am confident they will lead to greater understanding of all who participate. A final message before we take questions. Since becoming mayor, I have surrounded myself with a diverse and talented team that have helped me view every challenge we face through a number of different lenses. Through this process, I have been able to view this incident through the lens of Chief Buckner, an accomplished, battle-tested law enforcement professional still working to build trust and confidence with his new colleagues and his new constituents. I have viewed it through the lens of our deputy mayor, a strong and passionate professional woman who has worked in the trenches in our community for over 30 years and goes to bed every night praying that one of the many kids she's worked with, and even her 19-year-old son, don't someday find themselves in a similar situation. And I viewed it through the lenses of the many constituents that we've heard from over the past 3 weeks, whose vastly different experiences with law enforcement throughout their lives created vastly different perceptions and opinions about this incident. If your mind was made up one way or another after watching this video just one time, I challenge you to try to view it through a different lens. If nothing else, we could all benefit from a little more empathy in our community. To all in our city, I pledge this. We can do better, and working together, we will. Thank you, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Chief, for you and the mayor together on this, and then I have a follow-up on compliance because I know you've talked about that a lot. Would you be comfortable, both of you, with the officers involved in that traffic stop at Grace and Oswego Street pulling over you and members of your family?
I personally would be very comfortable with those officers pulling over me or members of my family, and every family has someone in the family that maybe is not reflective of all of our family's values, but I can tell you that by and large the vast majority of the people who are in my family would react to the officers the same way that Mr. Osorio reacted to the officer, which is we would do what the officer asked us to do. But knowing what I know about the profession, that if I don't do that, I'm fully aware that there will be consequences for my actions if my behavior is reflective of someone who's not complying with the law.
Sure. So, yes, I would be comfortable, but I want to go back to the statement that I made, that people have had vastly different experiences with law enforcement through the course of their lives. So just because I feel comfortable doesn't mean everyone is going to feel comfortable. I think we have to be sensitive to that fact. But we also have to be sensitive to the chief's words and the chief's advice as to the appropriate way in which you handle a traffic stop.
And Chief, the follow-up on compliance is very broad, and you've touched on it a bit. You touched on it Monday after this incident. Where is the disconnect in the way that I feel when I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror? I get a lump, I start to get a little nervous, and my gut instinct is to comply. And the gut instinct of Shaolin Moore, whose gut instinct was not to comply. What is that disconnect? Can you, in your years in law enforcement, especially in urban areas, is there something that you've identified that can bridge that gap or identify where that disconnect is?
Great question. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. So there will be people who will agree and disagree with this decision. For people on both sides of that aisle, the one thing that is probably more prevalent than we either understand or willing to admit from the law enforcement side of the aisle, and that is that people don't always trust the messenger. You don't always trust the source who's conducted the investigation. One of the reasons why we believe that transparency is so important, so that we come out and talk to you and tell you what we did, why we did it, and how we did it. Historically, people have felt like that they've not had that footprint. They've not had that explanation. So I understand some of the mistrust. I understand some of the disconnect. And where the disconnect is that we as an organization and as a country, we have to recognize is that when you see the vast majority of these controversial issues, regardless of whether the controversy was legal, right, or within policy, the common denominator of that is police and black males. So would a black male feel differently about me, Kenton Buckner, pulling him or her over? Of course they will. Because the incidents that have shocked the conscience of our country when we've seen police at our worst has often involved black males, which is why you have mothers that if you tell a black mother that we have your son stop down the street, that there is a panic that goes on. And I understand that. And we have to be sensitive to that in law enforcement through cultural diversity training, through understanding the people that we're serving, understanding the historical scars of our city, making sure that we're sensitive to that without compromising officer safety. Because at some point, we still have to enforce the law. And in many of these areas where we're in and out every day to where we're being called to address these issues, we have to make sure that we're doing that in a respectful way, in a legal way, but also understanding all of the dynamics that are part of that environment to which we are serving.
Can you delve just a little deeper into that? Because I think, you hit on the point about the urban community and the lack of trust there. So what is the actual training in terms of getting police prepared to deal with urban communities, deal with men of color who sometimes view the police as public enemy?
Well, we have to talk about cultural diversity training. We have to talk about cultural awareness. We have to talk about the history of your city. We have to make sure that we're training you initially for that build-up of that 27 weeks that you get as a recruit. We have to talk about the training that you receive as a part of your continuing education, that we reinforce de-escalation, crisis intervention training, individuals with disabilities, whether that be mental or physical. And then we also have to have accountability systems in place that when we go off the rails, when we step outside of our value system, when we do things that are below the expectations of the people that we're serving, then we have something that flags that we have something that has a thorough investigation to be able to look into that, and that we do two things: hold the officers accountable if they're wrong and support them when they're right, even when it's ugly, even when it's unsightly, and even when we disagree. We need to stay at the table. For anyone who's frustrated today about the decisions that have been made, whether it be police or community, the thing that I respectfully request of you is we have a process. And we're not always going to get the desired outcome that we want in every decision. But it's important that we remain at the table in discussion, holding appointing officials accountable for the things that you've asked us to do as a police and public safety entity.
So, Chief, when you mentioned this dynamic and this relationship, particularly with officers and black males, my question is the proper protocol when you're doing a traffic stop in the beginning that we saw in the video. I know probably some of us, probably 1 minute, but some of us probably have been pulled over for traffic stops before, and you'll have an officer say, do you know why I'm pulling you over? I'm pulling you over for this reason. But what we saw in the video is the officer pull up and immediately open the door and say, get out of the car, and everything proceeds.
I respectfully disagree.
Okay.
What you saw is the officer, and we played the video, walk up, tell the individual why he stopped him, told him what he was under arrest for, and to exit that vehicle. We clearly gave instructions. It's clear that Mr. Moore in this encounter, and you all will have a copy of the presentation to be able to dissect this for yourselves at a time that you're not doing it where we're rushing you through a presentation. But you will clearly see we gave instructions. We told him what we were doing, why we were doing it, and that he was under arrest, and we have a duty to do that. And I think that we also have significant opportunities for improvement on how we do that. Maybe we need to slow down. If exigent circumstances exist, we've got to do what we have to do. If there's an officer safety issue, we need to address it immediately. But when we have time, we need to take time. That will be a point of emphasis going forward with our training to make sure that we're trying to prevent as many of these encounters as we possibly can. And then also we would respectfully ask the public, which is why we talk to young people about knowing your rights, knowing what to do in this situation and what not to do so that our young people are not doing that. Because Mr. Moore, regardless of what you think about Mr. Moore, at his worst, he was passive resistance in this incident with us, but it was clear that he believed that he thought he had the right to receive a ticket only. And one of the things that I will tell you about the law is educate yourself on the law before you take this level of non-compliance on something that you clearly have misinterpreted what the law states that we're able to do.
Chief, could you kind of give us a little bit more detail as to your conclusion in this matter? Because you said when it, in terms of use of force, was appropriate given the policy and the different lenses you looked at it under. But you said you're disciplining them for another reason. So could you give us a little bit more detail as to kind of
the discipline is for the demeanor that occurred by two of the officers during the incident. The use of force.
Such as when you say demeanor, what does that mean?
Our overall approach to the call, the language that we use while dealing with the individuals, and that's the primary violation of the demeanor policy. The use of force is obviously all of the use of force, physically taking him from the vehicle, taking him to the ground, the methods that we use to get him to give us compliance. All of that is a part of the force evaluation.
You have a policy that you and your team have come up with. There was a previous policy. Which one do you evaluate both of those scenarios under, or do you use both of them? How do those policies work? What's in place now?
Well, what's in place now is the current policy that we have that was used for this investigation. We've released to you a new use of force policy that will be effective on July the 1st because we have to train the officers internally on the policy. Two common denominators in both policies is the overarching theme of reasonable and necessary, which exists in both policies.
Chief, in your career, what's the most force that you've used? Sorry.
I would say probably striking an individual with a nightstick or flashlight.
So using an object that's part of your uniform
Yes, sir.
to strike someone.
Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, Chief, were all the officers seen in that video disciplined?
Two of the four officers were disciplined. Yes.
But you can't say what the discipline was.
I cannot say the discipline, which is why we released the 58, so that you don't think that I'm pulling something out of the sky, and this is Chief Buckner's way of holding our information like this. Because while I respect the civil rights law that was put in place, and I understand, why we have to have those protections because employees have rights as well. I will tell you that I believe that it unintentionally causes mistrust. I think it creates suspicion because people are more likely to respect the process when they know the full outcome. And I'm hopeful that we can have some traction on how to do that without harming our officers, because I don't want to expose them to where people are doing or saying things to them because they've been exposed on something that happens to them, because I'm always going to be very sensitive to that as well, equally to making sure that the public has information.
And on the issue of language, Chief, where
Go ahead, ma'am.
That they're still working, or are they suspended for a time, or can you give us just at least that?
The officers are in service.
Chief, what are the options for discipline in general? What levels of discipline?
It ranges from a counseling to termination.
Which officers specifically?
Officer Buskey, Officer Brown.
And Chief, in this case specifically, what should Shaolin Moore have done differently? What should the officers have done differently?
I think that it's clear that let's start with our officers. As far as doing differently with the force, I think that they did what they needed to do given the level of resistance that they had. I think the manner in which we spoke to Mr. Moore, we certainly have opportunity for improvement with that. We've recognized that and we've addressed it. I think that we could also Monday morning quarterback and say, hey, maybe take a little more time. It's easy to do that sitting in a climate control room that's too hot right now. But I certainly think that we always have to take a look at ourselves to see what could we have done to prevent those kinds of things. So when you talk about what we could have done, part of that is reevaluating policies, reevaluating our training, and making sure that we're giving the officers enough tools to be able to manage that situation. The thing with Mr. Moore, he has a right to ask what's going on, why am I being stopped? He did some of that to some degree. But once the officers give you instruction, Mr. Moore needs to step out of the vehicle and do what the officers are asking him to do. Despite a disagreement, despite not thinking that you've done anything wrong, the time and place to do that is to file a formal complaint if you want to do that through internal affairs, or to address it through our court system where he will be facing those charges that he was given on this incident.
Chief, on the issue of form and format of the arrest report, it seems like there was an extensive narrative of previous and unrelated arrests that happened in the same area, but that police report that was submitted, is that the correct form and format that you're looking for your officers to supply to give a narrative of?
I don't know what you mean by the form of the arrest. I will tell you that we certainly want to make sure that we meet the elements of the charges to which the individual has been charged, and if there is relevant information that we think that should be considered when we're in court having to defend why we arrested this young man, I think that any of that information is appropriate for that under those circumstances.
So the drugs arrest with the weapon that happened earlier in the same area, that's something that's relevant to that should be in the arrest report?
I think it's relevant because when you talk about what's going on in and around an area, and the fact that we had just dealt with an individual of a call to where we have an individual who's dealing drugs and also has a weapon. In and around that area, several other gang members had been noticed. And then we make a traffic stop in the immediate proximity of that area. Of course, our antennas are up. Now, the antennas being up does not give us a right to use force. It doesn't give us a right to be extra aggressive. But we certainly want to talk about the climate and what was going on at the time that we came into contact with this young man when we observed him violating the noise ordinance. And it certainly shouldn't be something that we transfer from one incident and we put that all on Mr. Moore, but to say that our officers don't have that in the back of their minds, that you've just noticed several gang members in the area, common sense will tell you, of course that's on your mind when you're walking up to this vehicle.
Chief, on the issue of language, you're an idiot man, you're a complete idiot, good job taking a ticket to a trip to jail, and the comments that were made afterwards by Common Council President Helen Hudson, which was a short statement, but it was, why is the officer so angry? Did you get to the bottom of that in your review of this?
Well, I think that
did the officer appear angry to you?
Well, I think that the officer appeared to have some issues with demeanor on the call. I don't know if I would describe that as angry. I think that if we go on the 32 seconds or the 31 seconds that was originally released, it's very easy to come to that conclusion. But if you see the 20 seconds that preceded that, instructions, what, why, step out of the vehicle, I will think that there was more time given than what actually appeared in the first instance. But I think that we could intelligently argue we had more time to do other things. But I think that's second guessing something that's very subjective. It doesn't necessarily make the officer wrong in that example. But when we have time, we should always take more time so that we can try to prevent these kinds of incidents from occurring.
Chief, what's the department's policy on a passenger, in this case, rolling on the whole incident? Because an officer did then take the phone away and didn't allow that passenger to continue rolling on the cell phone. What's an officer's approach to that situation when a personal device is being used to record the event? So
when I hear rolling, I'm assuming media terminology that he's filming.
Yeah. He hit the red button on his iPhone.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So first of all, he has a First Amendment right to record police. That's his First Amendment right. We engaged that gentleman because he's a passenger in a vehicle that we've had to forcefully take someone out of that vehicle for arrest. He's at some point partially or does something to catch the attention of our officers because he's moving around in that vehicle. We have 3 officers on the ground dealing with the individual who remains non-compliant and someone moving around in the vehicle. We go around to the passenger side of that vehicle and we engage Mr. Osorio. We take his phone, we put it on the ground, it continues to record. There's no video recording of that, but we do have audio recording of that to some about 4 minutes. Did he have a right to record? Yes, but if I'm going to take you from that vehicle, if you ask 100 police officers during that encounter with Mr. Osorio, who was completely compliant, we're never going to deal with you until I know who you are, what you're doing with anything in your hands. That's law enforcement 101. Everyone knows it. Everyone understands why it's important, and we're not going to allow you to have anything in your hands until I can figure out who you are and what you're doing.
Chief, what's the difference between the old policy and the new?
Well, there are several differences in the policy when you talk about some of the areas, which is why we gave you all both copies so that you will be able to review that for yourself. I'll highlight a couple of the differences when you talk about the de-escalation mentioned, when you talk about the sanctity of life, when you talk about the duty to intercede. There are a number of things. The whole policy was completely rewritten. Some of the themes are are part of our old policy that we were doing in practice, but we did not have it in our written documents. And we look forward to, in the future, addressing many of those issues because somewhat unintentionally, the new use of force policy has been kind of drowned out in all of this incident, which is why we want to illuminate it to its proper status at the appropriate time and venue, we believe, on June the 28th.
Do you know why Daniel Osorio was arrested?
Go ahead, sir.
De-escalation, which is outlined in the new policy.
Yep.
Have these officers been evaluated on the new policy? Do you think they would have been in line with the de-escalation policy?
If we were to review these officers during this incident, looking at the new policy, I think you can be subjective and say, could there have been further violations of demeanor or de-escalation for the policy? You could probably make that argument. I wouldn't want to woulda, coulda, shoulda with that, but looking at it obviously with the de-escalation, that's another layer of scrutiny that you certainly have to pass with the new policy. But the overarching themes of the policies are the same, but the de-escalation, duty to intercede, other things like that about taking your time, doing the appropriate things with the individual, it very well could have changed the incident, but it's not 100% guaranteed.
Use of force, Chief, in the lens of both of those policies?
I think the use of force would have been the same because of the overarching theme of reasonable and necessary.
Chief, last week we showed a video.
I'm going to take this young lady in the back.
We see the video here of Busky's body cam, and then it stops, and then we see the video that's been posted on social.
Mm-hmm.
Can we see the video, the full body cam video of Busky's?
You all will have the videos that are releasable at the appropriate time. Please keep in mind that Mr. Moore is still facing criminal charges here that he has to go forward on, and we don't want to release something that will jeopardize the integrity of that prosecution of the case, but at the appropriate time we will make all of the videos that are releasable to the public.
Chief, you've mentioned several times the importance of due process.
Yes.
Internally in your department. What do you hope the community sees today different from their initial reaction to the passenger's video, then their opinion changes based on the other perspective, the other angles, the body cam? How do you expect some people's opinion of this situation to change seeing other angles?
I didn't necessarily walk in here today with the goal of changing anyone's opinion. A chief has really no shelter in this kind of decision. No matter the decision that I make, I'm going to have a for and against audience. But the thing that I wanted the public to appreciate is that we have a process. We have a level of transparency that we haven't had and that we hope to increase. Due process is important. Patience is important. We met with several stakeholders today to give them the information about this release before we're releasing it to the public, and that they see the value of being at the table, discussing the issues that have frustrated us for decades, and that we talk about how we move forward from this incident to where we can pause here to talk about the things that need to be done or improved, but we don't park at a disagreement. That's my hope from the whole due process part.
How has your relationship with the chief changed?
See what happens when you get here early, get a front seat?
I'll give you a quick rest from talking.
Go ahead, sir.
Mayor, you did not know Chief Buckner before you hired him. I'm wondering, through the lens of this incident and the review, how has your relationship with the chief changed, or what have you learned about him?
I can tell you that I was very confident when we hired Chief Buckner that he was the right person for the job, and however many months we're into it, and after this incident, I'm even more confident. The chief has handled himself professionally with the highest of integrity and has been focused solely on one outcome, which was doing the right thing, regardless of popularity. I believe he's done that, and I believe that going forward, the way in which we continue to engage with the public, the way in which the chief continues to engage with the public, will ultimately make a difference and improve things. So the chief and I are rock solid.
Did this tighten up the relationship?
Can you address Common Council President Helen? I believe she left, but she did release that statement. Have you all had a conversation? What has that been like, and has there been a solution from that?
I have had a number of conversations with Councilor Hudson since this arrest. I hold Councilor Hudson in the highest of esteem, and given her work in the community, particularly around the issue of violence in our community, gives her a solid platform to share her perspective. I respect her perspective. I've learned from her perspective, And I can tell you, as leading right up until this morning when we had our discussion, again, whether or not we agree on everything, I can't say for sure, but I can say that our level of respect for the council president remains very high. I believe the same. It goes the other way, and she and all of the common councilors are going to continue to be critical partners as we try to make the improvements that we've laid out here today, as are every member of our community.
What about the NAACP? Have you met with President Linda Brown?
We had members of representatives of the NAACP in a briefing this morning where we went over the results of the investigation. Again, every one of these organizations and individuals plays a critical role in this conversation and in this community, and we respect that, even if we don't always agree. So I think, again, getting back to the question of what we hope to accomplish going forward, in addition to that increased level of transparency that the chief talked about, an increased level of dialogue across the board can only help things.
Councilor Hudson called this excessive. Do you think she needed to wait for the process to play out?
Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and again, everyone looks at this situation through a different lens. I'm not going to speak for Councilor Hudson. She's very capable of speaking for herself,
and
I
Mayor, as a
respect that.
non-officer, when you watch those videos, what goes through your mind?
It's emotional. I think it's emotional for all of us, I certainly had concerns, again, thanks to the counsel of the chief and my trust in the chief, I was willing to allow for the due process to take place. But I understand those that didn't feel the same way, and I respect that. So again, this entire process has been emotional for all parties involved, and again, I think we've all learned from it, and we'll continue to learn from it. But again, it comes down to what's right, and I know that has always been the chief and his entire team's focus. We and everyone in the front of this room can attest to it. We had some very difficult, emotionally charged conversations, raised voices. I pushed the department hard and tried to ask the questions that I knew our constituents had. Again, everyone looks at this a little bit differently, and I think it's important for all of us to understand the different perspectives. But I believe in this team at the police department, and I believe we're going to continue to make improvements here.
Chief, do you have any indication that the two officers in the video that were disciplined, that they knew Mr. Osorio or Mr. Moore before this?
I believe there was some level of familiarity with the occupants of the vehicle on the part of our officers.
Okay, I have another question too. We did last week release a video on our air of a father from Florida. He bought his son a car for graduation, and he recorded it. He said, I told him he could not drive this car until I taught him how to respond if a police officer pulled him over. His kind of interpretation of what to do was to have your hands outside of the car and put everything on top of your car. And we've talked to other law enforcement, members, and they've said that would be very jarring to a police officer to have kind of everything out of the car and, your hands out. He said that might do more harm than good. Use this as a teaching moment, I guess, for the community, and talk to parents who are worried about their kid. This father's reasoning, he said, I want my son and everybody else's kids to come home.
Have you seen that video at all?
I have not seen the video. My apologies for that. But I will tell you, as a young man who grew up with a single parent, my mother, that if we had more fathers who were willing to sit down with their kids and have that conversation, we would not be having many of the disturbing issues, specifically with violence, specifically with high levels of incarceration, specifically with crime in saturated areas, that if we had more fathers taking the time to do that, many of these conversations we wouldn't be having. Is it appropriate to show your hands? I don't think it's ever inappropriate to show your hands. You don't want to do it in a sarcastic kind of way, but anytime that the officer can see your hands that you're not a threat, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Chief, some counselors have said that the officers, maybe they should have had time to cool off before there was that drug and gun investigation before that. What are your thoughts on that? Should there have been time? Should someone else have taken that call rather than officers?
What's your name, sir?
Tom Magnarelli.
Mr. Magnarelli. So you've called the police. You have an incident that you want to report something, and you're a taxpaying citizen. And what's your response to the police if we tell you, got a time out right now? get back to you later. What do we expect that officer to do when you see a violation of the noise ordinance to where we're averaging about 10 a day, every community meeting that we go to, and you see someone bumping their system going through here? Now, does that mean that citizen is the worst of the worst? No, he's a young man playing his music loud, and we've all done that. But I think in this circumstance, the officers observed a violation of one of our ordinances. They stopped the young man. They gave him instructions, and we all are aware of what transpired after that. Do I think it's time when you have time to mentally downshift? Agreed. Do I think if we have time, we should take more time? Agreed. But I think it's unreasonable to think that we as police have the time to formally do those kinds of things because we've been involved in some kind of more substantive issue preceding that incident.
Chief, why was it important to see the photo after of this arrested suspect?
Well,
Why is that a part of this?
It was important for me. I'm well aware of many of the photos that have been the subject of some of the lawsuits that we have that are both current and future. And that doesn't necessarily mean, I don't want our audience to equate that to, that if he had some other injuries that I would have automatically said that the officer's actions were excessive. But I think it was important that when you take from the point of how you felt about the video before seeing the pictures, what disturbed you, what you thought was too much, what you thought was too egregious. And then when you look at what Mr. Moore looks like right before he's booked, I think that's significant because it says that, yeah, it may have been unsightly, but clearly this is not a guy who's been pummeled. This is not a guy who's been stomped. This is not a guy who's had the heck beat out of him, and I think the pictures show that. There are some ugly, gruesome times when you're going to see exactly that, and that may be within our policies, our laws, or within our training. But I think we should always have to walk to this podium and intelligently defend what we've done. We have the ability to take life and liberty, and someone should always be looking over our shoulder. We should always be answering questions, and we owe an explanation to the public when we have these kinds of circumstances to be able to tell them what we've done and why.
Chief, just to clarify,
Last question. Go ahead, ma'am.
There is no specific time during a routine traffic stop in general that the body camera has to be turned on right now. You said the policy is being changed. Do we know when that changes?
That change, the written language has already occurred. Yeah. There's a logistical process for us to send that through the agency where the appropriate people sign off on that, and then we disseminate that information through our system where the officers can see what the new policy is and what the expectations are. And the main change of that is there will no longer be in a off status while they are working. They would only have to do the double tap to activate the recording, which in our old policy that was kind of vague, and sometimes our officers were completely turning off the cameras and then have to completely boot it up before it was eligible to do so.
Can you just quickly talk about internal affairs? I know that's something that you have been passionate about, beefing that division up. Where does that stand in terms of internal reorganization?
It's a part of this continued top-to-bottom assessment that we do of the police department. It is a significant point of emphasis for me and also the training division, as I stated earlier. Resources is a part of that. Technology is a part of that. Training, and then making sure that we're just reflective of industry best practices. And then specifically one of the things is to begin to do a better job with the CRB relationship and responding to those investigations where we're doing these types of investigations thoroughly and in a timely manner, and also responding to the CRB issues, which is well documented that we've gotten behind on some of those.
How instrumental was the CRB within this situation?
CRB did a great job of, one thing I appreciate from them is they were patient. They didn't rush to judgment. The same thing for you all in the media. I appreciate you not rushing to judgment, allowing due process to take place. They allow the evidence to come out before we make decisions. They certainly want to work with us in reviewing future policies that we have going forward. And then when they received that video that had the complete 4 minutes that showed that Officer Bach's phone that he put down actually recorded 4 minutes versus the 32 seconds like we thought, we wouldn't have that information were it not for CRB.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you. Any future information requests can be made through the Public Information Office. Thank you.